Doctor knew she was going to die alone in the darkness between stars. The warning lights had stopped flashing 3 hours ago. Now there was only the soft red glow of emergency power and the quiet hum of failing life support. Her research vessel, the persistent Curiosity, drifted through the expanse like a dead leaf on a frozen river. The main engine had exploded without warning. The backup systems had failed shortly after. Her distress beacon was broadcasting, but knew the truth. She was 3 months from the nearest human outpost. No one would reach her in time. She floated in the command chair, wrapped in every blanket she could find. The temperature had dropped to near freezing. She had maybe 40 hours of oxygen left, perhaps less. Was a scientist, not a soldier. She had spent her life studying distant stars and strange cosmic events. She had never expected to die like this, cold and alone, so far from Earth that her signal would take years to reach home. She thought about her mother, who had begged her not to take this mission. She thought about her colleagues, who would wonder what happened to her. She thought about all the research she would never complete, all the discoveries she would never make. Closed her eyes and tried to make peace with the end. That was when the alien ship appeared. At first, thought she was dreaming. The vessel that dropped out of faster-than-light travel was unlike anything she had ever seen. It was long and graceful, with a hull that seemed to shimmer like the wings of a moth. Strange lights pulsed along its surface in patterns that reminded her of breathing. The ship was small, clearly not a warship, but it moved with careful purpose toward her crippled vessel. Its communication system crackled to life. The voice that came through was soft and musical, speaking in a language she did not understand. But the tone was clear. It was a question. It was asking if she needed help. With shaking hands, activated her universal translator. The device was old and not very reliable, but it was all she had. She spoke slowly, hoping the aliens would understand. "Yes, please, I need help. My ship is dying, I am dying." There was a long pause. Then the alien voice returned, now translated into rough but understandable English. "We are coming, do not be afraid." The aliens called themselves the learned this later, after they had saved her life, but in that first moment she knew nothing about them. She only knew that strangers had found her in the void and chosen to help. The rescue was not easy. The expanse was dangerous, full of gravitational anomalies that could tear a ship apart without warning. The vessel, called the Whisper of Dawn, had to navigate carefully through the unstable region. Twice, violent gravitational waves struck both ships. Heard strange sounds through her hull, the groaning of metal under stress. She later learned that 2 crew members were injured during the rescue, thrown against walls when their ship was caught by an unexpected gravity surge. But they did not turn back. They did not abandon her. When they finally connected their ship to hers, saw them for the first time. They were tall and slender, with 6 limbs and large compound eyes that reflected light like jewels. Their bodies were covered in fine, soft fibers that reminded of moth wings. They moved with a gentle grace that seemed almost impossible for beings of their size. The captain, a female named Saul, entered ship first. She carried a breathing mask and a thermal blanket. Tried to speak to thank them, but she was too weak. The cold and the lack of oxygen had taken everything from her. Saul simply wrapped the blanket around her and pressed the breathing mask to her face. Fresh, warm air filled her lungs. She began to cry. They took her aboard their ship and cared for her like she was one of their own. They did not know what humans needed to survive. They had never met a human before. But they learned. They tested different foods until they found combinations that could digest. They adjusted the temperature of her quarters to match what her body required. They even created a special bed because human bodies did not rest the same way bodies did. Spent 6 weeks aboard the Whisper of Dawn, slowly recovering her strength. During that time, she learned about her rescuers. They were a small civilization, only 12 worlds in total. They were not warriors or conquerors. They were poets, artists, philosophers, and explorers. They believed that the universe was a great tapestry, and every life was a thread woven into its fabric. To save a life was to strengthen the tapestry. To let a life be lost when you could save it was to weaken everything. Captain Saul told this one evening as they sat together, watching the stars through a viewing window, had asked why. Why had they risked so much to save a stranger? Why had they spent precious resources, injured their own crew members, and delayed their mission for someone they had never met? Saul's compound eyes seemed to glow with warmth. Her translator rendered her words carefully. Because you were alone, because you needed help, because we could give it. What other reason could there be? Had no answer. In her experience, nothing in the universe was free. Every species she knew operated on calculations of cost and benefit. The idea that someone would risk everything for a stranger, simply because it was right, was almost impossible to believe. But they had done exactly that. When was finally strong enough to travel, they gave her a small shuttle, enough supplies for the journey, and detailed star charts to reach human space. Captain Saul refused any payment, any promise, any debt. "You owe us nothing," she said. "You owe the universe only to pass kindness forward when you can." Left the whisper of dawn with tears in her eyes. She promised herself she would never forget what they had done. She would find a way to repay them somehow, someday. She did not know then how completely she would keep that promise. 3 years passed after return to Earth. She went back to her work, published her research, and received awards for her discoveries in the expanse. Her colleagues welcomed her home. Her mother cried with joy. Life continued as if nothing had changed. But it changed. Every night before she slept, she thought about Captain Saul and the crew of the Whisper of Dawn. She thought about the warmth of strangers who had saved her life and asked for nothing in return. The memory never faded. It stayed with her like a gentle weight on her heart. She stayed in contact with Saul through long-range communication relays. Messages took weeks to travel between human space and territory, but sent them faithfully. She told Saul about Earth, about human culture, about the small details of her daily life. Saul responded with stories of poetry and philosophy, with images of their beautiful, with questions about human customs that made smile. For 2 years the messages were happy, but then they began to change. Saul wrote about shadows gathering at the edges of space. A power called the Dominion had been expanding aggressively, conquering smaller civilizations and absorbing them into their empire. They were warriors, brutal and efficient. They respected only strength and saw other species as resources to be used. Several neutral civilizations had already fallen to them. The small and peaceful lay directly in their path. Searched human databases for information about the Dominion of. What she found made her blood run cold. The conquered without mercy. Species that resisted were crushed. Species that surrendered were enslaved. Their empire had grown steadily for centuries, and the galactic community did nothing to stop them. The major powers considered the problem for someone else. The species being conquered were too small to matter. They were too small to matter. The messages from Saul grew darker. Border colonies went silent. Ships disappeared without explanation. The government pleaded with the galactic community for help, but no one answered. They were poets and philosophers, not warriors. They had nothing to offer in exchange for protection. They were alone. Then came the final message. The Dominion of had issued an ultimatum. They must surrender their sovereignty and accept integration into the Dominion. They would become subjects of the Empire. Their worlds would belong to the Dominion. Their people would serve masters. They had 30 standard days to comply. If they refused, the Dominion fleet would come. The government refused. They would not surrender their freedom. They would not watch their culture be erased. They would fight, even though they knew they could not win. Saul's message was not a request for help. She knew that humanity was far away, that humans had their own problems, that asking strangers to go to war was unreasonable. The message was simply a goodbye. "Thank you for your friendship," the translation read. "You have shown me that kindness exists beyond our stars. Whatever happens, I am glad we met. I am glad we saved you. Live well, my friend. Read the message 7 times. Then she began to cry. Then she stopped crying and began to think. They had saved her when they had no reason to help. They had risked their lives, spent their resources, and asked for nothing. Now they were facing destruction, and no one in the galaxy cared enough to help them. Could not accept this. She would not accept this. She started making calls. She called her colleagues at the university, told them the story of her rescue, asked them to spread the word. She called journalists she knew, gave interviews, shared recordings of her time aboard the Whisper of Dawn. She called politicians, sent letters, demanded meetings. She spoke to anyone who would listen. The story spread slowly at first, but there were perfect heroes for the human imagination. They were gentle aliens who had saved a human life without expecting any reward. They were innocent victims facing destruction by cruel conquerors. And they were friends of humanity, connected through friendship with Captain Saul. News networks picked up the story. Social media exploded with discussions. People who had never thought about alien civilizations before suddenly cared deeply about The question spread across Earth and every human colony. What will we do? Someone saved one of ours. Now they need help. Will we help them? The answer came faster and louder than had ever expected. Volunteers flooded military recruitment centers. Veterans who had retired years ago demanded to be reactivated. Ship captains from private vessels and commercial freighters sent messages to the government offering their services. Protests formed outside government buildings, not against the government but demanding action. Humanity wanted to help Humanity wanted to repay the debt. The pressure became impossible to ignore. 2 weeks after began her campaign, the United Earth government made an announcement. The president stood before cameras and spoke words that changed galactic history. The people saved a human life when they had no obligation to do so. They showed us kindness without calculation. Now they face destruction by a power that knows only cruelty. Humanity does not forget those who help us. Humanity does not abandon its friends. As of this moment, the people are under the protection of the United Earth government. Any attack on territory will be considered an attack on human interests and will be met with the full force of human military power. The galaxy was shocked. Humanity was declaring war on the dominion of aliens they had barely met. Analysts called it madness. Strategists called it impossible. They were far from human space. The logistics alone seemed insurmountable. The Dominion dismissed the declaration as empty words. Humans would never actually fight for insignificant aliens. The cost was too high. The benefit was too low. It made no sense. They were very wrong. The Dominion fleet entered space on the 31st day. 400 warships moved through the darkness like predators hunting weak prey. The flagship of Supreme Admiral led the formation, a massive vessel bristling with weapons that had destroyed dozens of civilizations. Behind it came cruisers, destroyers, troop carriers, and support ships. It was the largest fleet the Dominion had assembled in decades, sent to crush a species of poets and dreamers. Supreme Admiral stood on his command bridge watching the stars. He expected no real resistance. They had no significant military. A few patrol ships, perhaps some converted civilian vessels, nothing that could stand against Dominion firepower. This would be a simple conquest. They would fall within days, and the Dominion would add another species to its empire. The human declaration of protection meant nothing to him. Human space was 3 months away at standard speeds. Even if the humans truly intended to fight, they could never arrive in time. They would be conquered before any help came. The humans would complain, perhaps send diplomatic protests, and then accept reality. This was how the galaxy worked. His tactical officer interrupted his thoughts with a strange report. Long-range sensors were detecting unusual readings ahead, near the energy signatures that did not match any known technology. The readings were confused, scattered, as if something large was disrupting local space. ordered the fleet to proceed with caution. Perhaps they had prepared some kind of defense. Perhaps they had purchased weapons from another civilization. It did not matter. Nothing could stop 400 Dominion warships. Then space itself seemed to tear open. 1,200 human vessels dropped out of faster-than-light travel directly between the Dominion fleet and the. They appeared in perfect formation, filling the of every Dominion ship with steel and fire. Battleships the size of small cities, carriers launching swarms of fighter craft, destroyers and cruisers moving into attack positions with precise coordination. The largest fleet humanity had ever assembled outside their own territory had crossed impossible distances to stand in defense of strangers. Stared at his screens in disbelief. This was impossible. 3 months of travel in 6 weeks. The logistics alone should have broken any fleet. The fuel costs, the supply lines, the strain on ships and crews. How had they done it? He would learn later that humanity had pushed beyond every limit to reach the end time. Engineers had worked themselves to exhaustion improving engine efficiency. Crews had slept in short shifts, eating quick meals, sacrificing comfort for speed. Supply stations had been constructed along the route by civilian volunteers who raced ahead of the fleet. The entire journey had been an act of will, a refusal to accept that distance was an obstacle. At the head of the human formation was the flagship Unconquered, and aboard it stood Admiral James. His grandfather had been a refugee, saved by strangers during a terrible war on Earth generations ago. The debt of gratitude had been passed down through his family like a sacred trust. When he heard the story of the Indoctor, he had volunteered immediately to lead the fleet. Standing beside him on the bridge was herself. She had refused to stay behind. If humanity was going to war for the, she would be there to witness it. Admiral opened a communication channel that broadcast to both the and the Dominion fleet. His voice was calm and steady. 3 years ago, a ship found a human alone and dying in space. They had no reason to help her. They gained nothing from saving her, but they did it anyway because it was right. That woman's name is, and she is standing beside me on this bridge. He paused, letting the words carry across the void. To the, you owe us nothing. We are here because we owe you. You showed us what kindness looks like between strangers in the darkness. We are here to show you what humanity does for its friends. To the Dominion of, you have 2 choices. Withdraw from space and never return, or learn why humanity has never lost a war among the stars. We do not make empty threats. We make promises. You have 1 hour to decide. On the, Captain Saul watched the human fleet appear on orbital displays. She had never seen so many ships in one place. Around her, citizens wept with shock and relief. They had prepared for death. They had said goodbye to their families. They had accepted that no one would come to save them. But the humans had come. Saul's compound eyes filled with tears as she whispered a prayer of thanks to the universe. Her people believed that saving a life wove your threads together with the one you saved. She had not understood how true that belief was until this moment. On the Dominion flagship, Supreme Admiral demanded explanation. He contacted Admiral directly, his voice thick with contempt and confusion. Why, he asked, why would your species cross the galaxy to fight for worthless aliens? What do you gain? What is the profit? This makes no strategic sense. Admiral's response was simple. His voice carried no anger, only certainty. They helped one of ours. That is all the reason we need. Did not understand. He could not understand. His entire civilization was built on calculation, on cost and benefit, on power and subjugation. The idea that a species would go to war out of gratitude, out of loyalty, out of simple decency was beyond his comprehension. The hour passed slowly. Could not retreat. To withdraw without fighting would mean disgrace. His own government would have him executed for cowardice. He had no choice but to attack, to prove that the Dominion could not be intimidated by human sentiment. When the hour ended, he gave the order. The Dominion fleet advanced toward the human lines. The Battle of Prime had begun. The first shots of the Battle of Prime were fired at exactly midnight local time. Dominion weapons lashed across space, bright lines of energy that could cut through armor and shields. Human ships answered with their own fire, missiles and plasma bursts that lit the darkness like artificial stars. The two fleets collided with terrible force, and the space around them became a storm of light and death. Supreme Admiral had expected the humans to be soft. His intelligence reports said they were merchants and explorers, not true warriors. They had won their previous wars through technology and numbers, not through courage or skill. He believed the sight of Dominion firepower would break their spirits. He was wrong. Human ships took damage that would have crippled Dominion vessels and kept fighting. When shields failed, crews sealed breaches and continued their attacks. When engines were destroyed, they used maneuvering thrusters to stay in the fight. Human pilots flew their fighters with reckless skill, weaving through enemy fire as if death was only a minor inconvenience. The Dominion tactical officers could not understand what they were seeing. One human destroyer, the Defiant Heart, was hit by 3 direct strikes that should have destroyed it completely. Instead, the crew sealed the burning sections, vented atmosphere to put out fires, and continued firing. The ship destroyed 2 Dominion cruisers before finally going dark. But what truly confused the Dominion was not human ferocity in combat. It was what the humans did for the. Scattered among the warships were vessels, small patrol ships and converted civilian craft that had no business being in a battle. They had come anyway, determined to fight for their even though they knew they could not win. The Dominion expected the humans to ignore these weak allies and focus on the enemy fleet. Instead, whenever a ship was in danger, human vessels broke formation to protect it. Destroyers moved between craft and enemy fire, taking hits meant for their allies. Cruisers provided covering fire while ships retreated to safety. When an orbital station was damaged, human marines boarded it to evacuate civilians while the battle raged around them. Human medics treated wounded with the same urgency as human casualties. Medical ships positioned themselves near vessels, ready to receive the injured. Combat rescue teams ignored tactical calculations to save every life they could, regardless of species. Admiral had given clear orders before the battle began. Every life was to be treated as valuable as a human life. They were not fighting only to defeat the Dominion. They were fighting to protect the people who had shown kindness to one of their own. If they let them die while saving themselves, the victory would be meaningless. By the 6th hour of battle, the Dominion fleet had lost over 100 ships. Human losses were significant as well, nearly 30 vessels destroyed, but the human formation held firm. More importantly, only 2 ships had been lost, both evacuated before they were destroyed. The humans were winning, and they were winning while protecting their allies. Could not understand. This violated every principle of warfare he knew. You did not weaken your position to protect weaker allies. You did not sacrifice tactical advantage for sentimental reasons. War was calculation. War was efficiency. War was not kindness. He ordered a concentrated attack on the. If he could not defeat the humans directly, he would destroy what they were protecting. Let them watch the cities burn. Let them see that their sacrifice was pointless. Admiral saw the attack coming. He did not hesitate. 30 human battleships moved to form a defensive line between the Dominion assault force and the planet. They absorbed wave after wave of enemy fire, their shields failing, their armor melting, their crews dying at their stations. They held the line for 2 hours while civilian evacuation continued below. Not one Dominion weapon reached the surface. During those 2 hours, one moment would become legend among both species. A human destroyer, the final word, was struck by concentrated fire from a Dominion carrier group. The ship was broken, its core about to collapse, its crew knowing they could not escape in time. The captain, a young woman named Sarah, opened a communication channel that every ship in the battle could hear. She did not plead for help. She did not cry out in fear. Instead, her voice was calm, almost amused. "Well, this is inconvenient. Attention, Dominion carrier Wrath of Empire, you have something of ours. Consider this a return delivery." The final word engaged emergency thrust and rammed directly into the Dominion carrier. The destroyer's reactor exploded on impact, destroying both ships in a flash of light visible from the planet's surface. Captain and her crew died instantly. They took over 3,000 Dominion soldiers with them. Citizens watched the flash of light in the sky and wept. They did not know the captain's name yet. They did not know the crew who had died. But they knew that humans had given their lives to protect strangers, had sacrificed themselves for a people they had never met, had treated survival as worth dying for. By the 12th hour, the Dominion fleet was broken. 160 ships destroyed, 83 captured. The survivors fled in disorder, their formation shattered, their morale collapsed. Supreme Admiral was captured when human Marines stormed his flagship. They found him in his command chair, staring at displays that showed the wreckage of his fleet. Admiral came aboard the captured vessel to accept the surrender. He stood before, surrounded by the ruin of Dominion pride. Looked at him with eyes full of confusion and rage. "Why?" he asked again, the same question he had asked before the battle. "Why would your people die for worthless aliens? What do you gain?" Admiral looked back at him without hatred, without anger. When he spoke, his voice was tired but certain. "You see the galaxy as resources to be taken. We see it as neighbors to know. They showed us kindness without expecting anything in return. We are returning that kindness with interest. That is what humanity does. We remember who helped us. We remember who hurt us. And we make sure the galaxy remembers too." Human losses in the Battle of Prime were significant, 43 ships destroyed, over 12,000 dead, but they stood untouched. The people lived. And humanity had shown the galaxy what it meant to have humans as friends. The aftermath of the Battle of Prime changed the galaxy forever. The dominion of, once feared by dozens of species, began to crumble within months of their defeat. The conquered peoples they had ruled for centuries watched what happened when someone stood against them. They saw the mighty Dominion fleet destroyed by a distant species that had come to protect strangers. They saw that they were not invincible. Rebellion spread through Dominion space like fire through dry grass. Species that had submitted in fear now rose up with hope. The military, weakened by their losses at Prime, could not contain the uprisings. Within 2 years, the Dominion fragmented into a dozen smaller states. The empire that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries was gone. Among the former Dominion subjects, a strange phenomenon emerged. They began seeking contact with humanity. They wanted to know the species that had crossed impossible distances to protect aliens they barely knew. They wanted to understand what drove humans to such actions. Many requested trade agreements, diplomatic relations, cultural exchanges. Some simply wanted to say thank you for showing them that resistance was possible. They became one of humanity's closest allies. The Humanity Compact was signed on the bridge of the Whisper of Dawn, the same ship that had rescued years before. Captain Saul, now considered a hero among her people, stood beside as representatives from both species pledged eternal friendship. The ceremony was simple. Saul extended her forward limb and clasped it in her hand. In tradition, this gesture meant threads woven together, lives connected forever. In human tradition, it was a handshake between equals. Both meanings were appropriate. "Your people saved one human," Saul said, her translator rendering her words with emotional precision. "And humanity came with an armada. This is more than we could have ever imagined." Smiled though tears ran down her cheeks. "You saved my life because it was right. We came because it was right. That is all it ever needs to be." The relationship between humans and grew stronger with each passing year. Trade flourished between their territories. Art and poetry became treasured on human worlds. Human technology and manufacturing helped the rebuild and expand. Young people from both species traveled to learn from each other, forming friendships that crossed the stars. But the impact went far beyond two species. Across the galaxy, the story of Prime spread like ripples across still water. Every spacefaring civilization heard the tale. A small, peaceful species saved one human life. Years later, humanity sent 1,200 warships to protect them from conquest. The message was clear, and every intelligent being understood it. If you helped a human, humanity remembered. If you harmed a human, humanity remembered. And humans did nothing by halves. Galactic attitudes toward humanity shifted dramatically. Species that had viewed humans as unremarkable suddenly showed great interest in diplomatic relations. Civilizations that had treated human travelers poorly began offering generous hospitality. It was not exactly fear that drove these changes, though fear was part of it. It was more like respect, mixed with careful calculation. A new saying entered common use across dozens of languages and hundreds of worlds. If you must trust a stranger in the void, trust a human. They will move stars to repay a single debt. On Earth, the Battle of Prime became a defining moment in human history. It proved that humanity could unite for noble purposes, that self-interest was not the only force driving their species, that kindness and loyalty could overcome cynicism and calculation. The names of the ships lost in the battle were carved into memorials. The story of Captain Sarah and the final word was taught in schools. Every year, on the anniversary of the battle, humans and celebrated together across both territories. Was offered many honors. Universities wanted to name buildings after her. Governments wanted to give her medals. Media wanted her to become a celebrity. She turned most of them down. She accepted only one honor, the one that mattered most to her. She became Earth's first ambassador to the spent the rest of her life building bridges between the two species. She learned the language fluently, without needing a translator. She immersed herself in their culture, their art, their philosophy. She helped humans understand the gentle beauty of thought and helped appreciate the fierce loyalty of human hearts. When disputes arose between the two peoples, she worked tirelessly to resolve them with wisdom and patience. She never married, never had children of her own. They became her family. The work of connection became her purpose. She said often that she had been given a second life when the whisper of dawn found her dying in space. She intended to spend that life repaying the gift. In her final years, old and frail but still sharp, received a visitor from a young named Saul II, grandchild of the captain who had saved her decades before, named in honor of that rescue. The young sat within her garden on a space station orbiting Earth. They watched the stars together, just as had once watched them with the elder Saul on the whisper of dawn. Ambassador, the young said carefully, using the formal title, may I ask you something my grandmother always wondered? Smiled, her face was lined with age but her eyes still held warmth. Of course. Why did they come? I know the history, I know the speeches. But your people came so far, sacrificed so much for strangers they had never met. My grandmother saved you because that is what do. But humans are not. Why did they come? Was quiet for a long moment. She looked at the stars, thinking about all the years that had passed, all the lives that had been changed, all the threads that had been woven together since that dying ship in the expanse. Your grandmother reminded us who we wanted to be, she finally said. Sometimes a species needs that, someone to show them kindness when there is no reason for it, someone to prove that the universe does not have to be cold. You gave us that gift when you saved me. The Armada was not payment. It was us saying that we understood. We were the same, and we would not let kindness die in the dark. Saul II sat in silence, letting the words settle into her heart. My grandmother had a belief, she said slowly. She believed that saving a life weaves your thread into the fabric of the universe. She believed you become connected to the one you save forever. Reached out and took the young Slim in her aged hand. Your grandmother was right. And now our threads are woven together, human and forever. That is what kindness builds. That is what loyalty protects. That is what makes the universe worth living in. The stars burned above them, countless and eternal, witnesses to a friendship that had changed the galaxy. And somewhere in the void, the threads of two species remained woven together, strong enough to move stars.